Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to make a Italian sausage pesto gnocchi soup. And we're going to start our sourdough breads for tomorrow to bake up, and then we're going to make some melts. So let's start by getting the soup ready. We're going to put a little bit of olive oil in our Dutch oven here, about a tablespoon to a tablespoon and a half. And I'm going to turn it on to about a 7. And then I have about a pound here of Italian sausage, which I'm going to snip into my Dutch oven. That way it's kind of like little Italian meatballs for our soup. We'll get this and easy. And they'll saute up, and then we'll put our onions in and get going, and then we'll work on our sourdough bread. Last night we had a little, I was like, the second time my sourdough bread didn't turn out quite to right, and it was because our outdoor refrigerator got really cold. It's where we normally keep our drinks, and I decided to put my sourdough in there because I didn't have room in my other fridges, and it got frosty. When I took it out, there was some ice crystals on the top, and I was like, oh, maybe this will work out. Nope. Apparently you can't freeze or get your sourdough that's proofing frozen or almost frozen. It won't pop up well. One of them turned out decent, but one of them was just so dense. So we're like, gotta make some new bread. And it was so sad because the one that wasn't, that was just so dense was the Italian herbs and cheese. And I really wanted to try it. And part of me thought when we took it out that maybe I should let it warm up to room temperature. But, we just went anyways, and definitely did not work. Okay, we got that going. I'm going to wash my hands real quick. We're going to let those start to saute up. Give them a nice coating in the olive oil. And now let's start prepping some of our sourdough breads. So we're going to start out with our base for it, which is going to be 100 grams active starter and then 375 grams of warm water. But let me go grab my bread flour. Forgot to grab it right here. Okay. We've got it. Always have plenty of bread flour. I buy mine in bulks. Okay. So I fed my starter this morning when we got up, get ready for the kids' school. So as you can see, it's nice and bubbly on the top, which is what you want. That's our active starter. So I'm going to give it a little stir. And as soon as you stir it, it completely drops down too because of the air bubbles in it. And we're going to add in 100 grams of our active starter. And I always like to use my scale because it comes out a bit more accurate. Grabbed a little too much there. Okay, perfect. And then we'll put 100 grams in this bowl because I'm going to use the same base recipe. And then we're just going to add an inclusion for my specialty one. So let's get this out. And there we go. And we're going to add 375 grams of warm water. You got to use warm water to it so that it will kind of rehydrate the flour nicely. Cold water, it just doesn't mix well and you'll have a drier end. So we want to have 375 grams. There we go. Which is about 1.5 cups. Perfect. Now we're going to do it in this one as well. So, and almost there. Perfect. Let's put our thing over here. Let's give ours a stir. I can hear it sizzling nicely. And we just cook up our Italian sausage here. I'm going to turn it down now that my Dutch oven has heated up so we don't want it to burn. And then we're going to add in about 2 teaspoons of salt, or between 8 and 10 grams. But I kind of just eyeball it. I need a little bit more on that one. And then using our dough whisk, we're going to mix it up until the whole starter has completely diluted into our thing. This is going to be for our sourdough breads. Our sausage that we're cooking up is going to be for our Italian sausage pesto gnocchi soup, which I'm excited for. I was trying to figure out what to make for lunch today, and gnocchi and pesto popped out of me, and I was like, okay, let's create something awesome with this. Okay, and now we're going to do the same thing until all of it has completely diluted itself. And the reason why you want to dilute it into the water is so that the flour can get absorbed the good starter. Let me grab a bowl to do our flour in, because my scale does not let me do a huge amount. Pop this shut. Okay. Now we are going to use 500 grams of unbleached bread flour. You want to make sure your bread flour is unbleached, because that's what the good, the starter needs, the fermentation needs for it to get nice and bubbly and give you a good crumb on it. So we're going to use, and it's about 3 cups. There we go. And you want to use definitely bread flour over all-purpose flour, because it has more gluten in it, which is going to lead to just a nicer crumb on your sourdough bread. There we go. So we've got 500 grams in that one. And then we're going to get this back to 0. And we're going to add 500 grams. There. And 439 almost to it. And then we'll use our dough whisk to mix these back in. Perfect. 501. Almost perfect. And we'll dump this in. And then we'll mix it up and we'll let it set. And during our first fold and stretch is when we are going to put our inclusion in for our specialty one, which we're going to use thyme, some Swiss and gruyere cheese, and a little bit of black pepper. Mix it. There we go. And of course, if you're not familiar with sourdough bread, the dough always starts out a little bit more sticky, but as the flour rehydrates, it becomes less sticky with time. So you can always dip your hands in water to do the stretch and fold so they don't stick, or you could rub a little bit of flour on as well.
Do you have a question? Do you use shredded cheese or cubes?
I like to use shredded cheese, although I've seen it both ways. So I think to use the cubes, you'd have to cut them a little bit smaller, which I think would just be a lot more work. But I think it would be really nice, evenly dispersed. I think they would be more dispersed evenly than shredded. So I think there are probably pros and cons for both. Okay. We've got our 2 sitting right here. We're done with our dough hook. So put this to the side and let's finish up getting our soup going here. Let me give it a nice stir. Perfect. Now that we've got our sausage, it's almost all the way cooked through, we're going to add in our onion. And we're going to take off the skin, and then we're going to do just about an average size dice. It doesn't have to be too small. There. And I'm going to cut it in half. Then I'm going to do about 4 slices across, and then just make little squares from there.
You have a question about your inclusion. If you do a sweet infusion, do you add sugar to your dough?
Um, you can. It just depends on whether you want to do how sweet you want your things. If you want your sourdough to be the base and not as sweet, just have like a there, then you wouldn't necessarily have to. But I I would just make it a little bit sweeter. You know what I mean? But again, if you want it just to be a very mild inclusion on it, or you want like the blueberries to pop, but I think, yeah, most of the time you would add some sugar to it. Perfect. Okay. So we got those cooking up, and let's get our kale in here, and we're going to let those saute for just a second, and let's put some spices in. So we're going to be using some basil paste as well as some pesto. This is just to make it so that the basil pops out a little bit more. So I'm going to use, that's about 1 teaspoon, 2 teaspoons of fresh basil paste. You could also use dried basil, which would probably be about, 2 teaspoons as well. And then we're going to use a big scoop of pesto. That's about a tablespoon. We want 1 more, so about 2 tablespoons of pesto. This is going to give it that nice flavor to our broth. But I like to cook it up before and into our onions and our sausage so that it melds nicer into our broth for our Italian sausage gnocchi soup. And it smells so good. If you've ever, the smell of pesto, it's just so yummy smelling. Okay, let's get that up. And let's get our broth. I'm going to use 4 cups of water. So let's fill up. And then a big kind of scoop of chicken bouillon so that I have a nice broth flavored for it. Let's see. We'll do 1 more cup since this got a lot of sausage there. And I want to have enough so that it has a nice fragrant broth. So we're going to do 5 cups. I always eyeball it and look how it looks in my pot to get the right amount. But you can see the pesto has already given it a lovely kind of greenish hue to it. We're going to actually give it a little brighter green hue in just a second. So we're going to get our blender ready, but let's add our chicken broth before I forget. We're going to add in a spoonful, kind of a heaping spoonful of this. So if you didn't want to use bouillon, you could have used straight up chicken broth. So we're going to add this in. Perfect. And let's let this simmer for just a second. We can start on our melts while we do this, because we're going to blend a little bit of the kale together to make a nice rich green broth for it, which will be absolutely delicious. But we want it to simmer just a minute. We've got our 2 sourdoughs. We'll do our stretches and folds in a little bit. Today, we are going to make some mozzarella and salami melts. So I was talking earlier about how my sourdoughs last night, because our fridge got too cold and kind of froze it didn't pop. And one of them did not turn out as well. This was the other one. It's a little bit denser than I would like, but it's still going to be great for making sandwiches. So at least it wasn't a complete loss. But the Italian herbs and cheese, because it also had an inclusion in it, it didn't bulk up, because I guess it was so cold in there that it just stopped all of that kind of that bulk rise that happens in the fridge.
The outside fridge.
Yeah, the outside fridge, not our inside. We have, for those of you who don't know, we have a lot of fridges, and we have, if we really just collected them, I guess, over time, we have 4 full-size fridges. Now, we are a family of 7, and then, so I have like our indoor fridge, and then we had a fridge right before that where the ice maker broke on it, and it was going to cost just as much money to essentially fix the ice maker as it was to buy a new one. So I was like, well, let's just move it to the garage and buy a new one. And then we had already had 2 fridges before because when we moved into our house, we had this like 1980s fridge that was, I was like, it was the one where the freezer was on top and the fridge was below. So we put that one out. So we always had 2 out there. And now we have 3 outside. But one's like my produce fridge, one's my meat fridge, and one's our drink fridge. And a drink fridge gets really cold and icy. Keeps our drinks perfect though, but not great for making sourdough bread. So note to self, they are not going in there. And I normally never put them in there. I always keep them in our inside fridge, but ours was kind of full of on some space with some cut up fruit. So I was like, oh, it'll be fine. It was not fine. Okay, so we're gonna use our mozzarella on here. And I kind of went with a really basic one because I love to dip my sandwiches into my soup. I love the broth, and I thought, oh, mozzarella, salami, and like a pesto broth would just be so perfect. So we're gonna do our nice layer on here, trying to make sure our cheese does not go over the edge because we don't want it to melt down and burn on the skillet. And that's everything else can go over, but not the cheese. And we're doing a nice layer. Perfect. And I was wondering, thinking about doing some sun-dried tomatoes in here, but I said we're going to be dipping it in the pesto, so keep it just simple. Where did my salami go? Oh, right here. Okay, so we've got our salami. You don't want to put it super thick because if you put it super thick, it won't cook up. So just a nice thin layer is all you need. Plus salami has such a strong flavor too that you'll get it in every bite and you won't feel like you're missing anything. And then let's do our second layer on here. And again, making sure that we're not going to go over it so we don't have a burnt cheese on our skillet. And this guy is ready. And now for the last one, and we're gonna let those cook up and we can start working on our soup, finishing that up. Okay, I think that's good. Yep, okay. I'm gonna I got my skillet on to about a 6. I'm gonna let it warm up. Okay, now that we have our broth kind of diluted, the chicken bouillon has kind of diluted into it now, so it has nice seasoning. What we're going to do is we're going to blend up some kale in here with some of our broth, making sure we can get the onions in, but don't get the sausage in. And let me put a little broth and then stuff a little bit more. This is going to give us a lovely green color to our soup. So the pesto gives you some, but this is going to give it like a really big pop. And then we'll put the rest of the kale in the soup. Perfect. You just want to make sure you have enough to kind of cover up. Excellent. Good. So I put about a cup of kale in there with here. Now we're going to give it a blend. And you see how it's just got a lovely bright green color now? And we're going to just add it right back into our soup, and it's going to give our broth this just gorgeous color. Just beautiful. See, look at that spring green here. Now it makes you really feel nice and springy. Let's get ours up and boiling. And we're going to put the rest of our kale in there so it can start to wilt. And once it comes to a boil, we're going to throw in our gnocchi. Gnocchi. I always forget to add extra ni at the beginning. Gnocchi into our soup. It takes about 2 to 3 minutes before it's nice and soft and tender. Okay, give this a nice stir, and then I'm going to make sure it doesn't need any more salt in here or any pepper, because we did use the basil and the pesto, so it should have a nice flavor. And then of course the chicken bouillon really helps bring out saltiness as well. Perfect. Doesn't need any more salt. Let's prep. We're going to bring this to a boil. We'll add our gnocchi in, but let's prep what we're going to put on top. We're going to have some, we're going to mince some Italian parsley, which if you guys don't know, it's the flat leaf parsley. And then you have curly parsley, which is like really like wavy. So when you use your parsley, you just want to make sure you take off the stems because they just are chewy and they're not going to give you the nice, delicate flavors that the leaves have. And then we're also going to have some green onions, which will give you just a nice little, like kind of pop of an onion flavor, which goes really well with pesto, the pesto in there. And if, yeah, like I was going to add some fresh basil too, but my plants are so sad over there. But like if you had a handful of fresh basil, that would also go great to chop, like put over the top to just really go with that nice kind of pesto theme here. Beautiful. We're almost done. That's the one thing about herbs. I love fresh herbs. They really, I think, elevate a meal over, dried ones whenever you can. But the picking off all the leaves, it's such a tedious thing. And I've tried like the herb scissors. They don't work, or those little things where you're supposed to pull each herb through, but then you have to literally like try to thread a needle every single time, which is just as much work as pulling them off yourself. There we go. It's probably actually be a great thing to have my toddler do it. He'd probably love picking off all these leaves. Maybe he'll be my sous chef. Okay, we're going to give these a nice chop up. We want to mince nice and small because we're going to throw these on at the last minute. And looks like my soup is starting to boil. It has such a lovely boil to it. It's so pretty. It really makes you like getting that spring vibe. Okay. Now that we have a boil, we're going to put our gnocchi in. You always want to make sure your broth is boiling so that, it's just like with pasta. You want to put it in there. And gnocchi, for those of you who don't know, is actually a potato pasta. So it's made from like, mashed potatoes essentially and egg and flour. I'm breaking them up.
You have a question? Is the soup vegan?
No, we use Italian sausage in it, but you could omit that and instead like you could put, more kale in it. And I was trying to think of what like would be a meaty vegetable that would be nice in this. Even mushrooms might actually be nice in this. You could saute up some mushrooms and have in there because mushrooms go really well with pesto. There we go. And one last one. So just one whole package of gnocchi. Beautiful. We're going to let that simmer up nicely. Let's see if our grilled cheeses are ready for their first flip. There it is. It's my grilled cheese spatula. It's actually a fish spatula, but it works great for flipping grilled cheeses. I'm going to turn it down just a little so we can go nice and slow and get our cheese melted on it. I'm going to turn this guy down just a little bit too. We've got a lovely boil. Now let's prep our green onions. I'm going to take off the very white tips and for these mild green, the white to right here, I'm going to throw into the soup now so they can get a little bit tender. And then the very tips, I'm going to keep as a garnish. And if you didn't have green onions, you could use chives if you wanted to. That would also be great. You wouldn't throw any of it in. You just use them all at the end. Okay, so let's toss some of these in right now with our soup. Beautiful. And now we're going to do a nice mince on the stems of the green onions that we can garnish over the top with, which will be lovely because they'll just give that nice little oniony kick to it. Let's turn this guy. He's got a rapid boil on there, which is perfect because our soup is almost done. That's the beauty with gnocchi. It cooks so fast. Beautiful. Okay. We're going to put in a little bit of cream, about, I want to say 1/4 of a cup. You don't need much. That's just going to make it kind of a smoother broth to it. And it's already, you can see it's already going to have a nice velvety broth because we blended that kale up. But it is going to be delicious. Perfect. Let's see if our grilled cheeses over here are ready to flip. Okay, good. Now we're going to do for the nice, deeper golden crisp on it. And while we're doing this right here, I'm going to turn our soup down to real low, let it simmer. And we are going to make the inclusion for our specialty loaf. Okay. So I'm going to do it in here. Let's actually, you know what? This one's a little bit easier. It's a little bigger. We're going to put in about a cup of, this is a Swiss and Gruyere cheese blend. That's a 1/2 cup and a cup of it. I don't like to go over cheesy on it because then it kind of messes with the rise and gets a little too dense. And then we're going to put in about a 1.5 teaspoons of ground black pepper. You want a lot in there because it's going to give it a nice little pop. And then I have some fresh thyme. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, take all the leaves off of these, but it's going to be worth it. I actually got some leaves right there. And just pick off the leaves as you go. Once I get there, if I can get a nice pull back, we can get the leaves off fairly easy. I just try to avoid getting as much of the stem in there as possible because it just won't have a nice texture, which is why I don't want to chop it up either. So, you know, they're delicate leaves, but they do pack a lovely punch. So, and they'll just go really great with the Gruyere and the Swiss cheese, as well as the black pepper. So definitely need to add them. If you didn't have fresh thyme, you could add in about 2 teaspoons of dried thyme, and that should get you, you know, where you need to be. The fresh thyme, of course, will give you a nice little pop of green in your bread versus dried. But you know what I always say, when you know, you don't have to just have fresh. Dried works out great too, if that's all you have. But I recommend everyone try to grow an herb garden. That is something that will benefit you. Just having those fresh herbs, and then you can, whenever you got like an overabundance of them, you just like freeze them down, and then you can use them like throughout the year. Okay. Almost. Got a stem in there. And then once I get all these thyme leaves in here, we'll do our stretch and fold, which will be the start of our stretch and fold that we want to do every 30 minutes for the next 2 hours. And that's to help develop the gluten in the bread. You're essentially kind of breaking those chains, giving it for the nice texture. So if your bread ever comes out a bit like gummy and doughy, it's because you didn't quite develop it as much, and meaning you weren't doing a nice stretching and folding. Okay, there we go. So it's going to be sticky at first. So what do you do if it's sticky? You see how it sticks to my hand? Just get your hands a little bit wet like this, and it won't stick nearly as much. And we're just kind of going around, and I am stretching and folding it and putting it back in. Now some people like add their inclusion at the very end, like the last stretch and fold. I like to add it at the first stretch and fold because I feel like it mixes around much better. Okay, let's see oh, perfect. These grilled cheeses are almost done. And then let's do the stretch and fold on this guy. So I'm gonna get my hands a little wet. You could also use bread flour too if it's like a really thing. And then we're gonna stretch and then fold, stretch, fold, stretch. fold. And I always feel like you can't overstretch and fold it. This is really just helping develop the nice texture in your bread. It's just like with making homemade pasta. Having the right, like kneading your dough for as long as you can is going to give you the most tender of the like pastas versus a stiff pasta. Okay, we've got our grilled cheeses ready and our soup is ready. We're just going to I'm going to save a little last for things and then I'm going to throw most of this in. We've got our parsley. We'll save a little bit for garnishing. There we go. Give it a nice stir. Beautiful. See if we can get any more off my hands. And let's ladle this up. And get my little cauldron out. And where did I have my ladle? We'll just grab a new one. Okay. So we'll put this is our pesto Italian sausage gnocchi soup with some kale and some parsley. And looks delicious. And then what I like to do is you're going to top it with a little bit of cheese. You could use Parmesan, mozzarella. I've got this Swiss and Gruyere out and I have a little bit of it, so we're going to use that. And then you want some green onions on it and then a little bit of parsley. And we're going to have that with our delicious grilled cheese. It's our salami and mozzarella grilled cheese. So absolutely delicious. And my favorite thing is to dunk our sandwich into our lovely broth that we made with the pesto, and it will just come together great. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day to kind of show you what we're eating in our house, what we're feeding our family, and hopefully answer any questions you guys might have. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe.